Hi, my name is Laura. This course is a follow-on from Toby Rampton's Beginner's Lino Cut course and is part of the Print to the People lockdown lessons. For this, I'm going to be showing you some different ways of working with multiple blocks, and so it's slightly more complicated from just doing a single design, and hopefully will give you lots of creative ideas. The first method I'm going to show you is what I call the freestyle method, which is where you can carve separate blocks that will build up a larger image. This doesn't really require registration, so if registration is something that you're struggling with, this is quite a nice way to experiment and not worry too much about it. The second method I'm going to show you is called the jigsaw method. This is where you literally cut your block into separate pieces. You can ink them up separately and then put them back together before printing and print them as a jigsaw in different colours. The third method is the most complicated of the three. This is called the key block method, where you have a block that works well as a single design. You might plan it to be just black and white, and then you work backwards to produce other blocks that will add more colour to the design. This method definitely involves registration, so that's something I'm going to go through with you as well. Okay, so the first method that I'm going to show you is the freestyle multiple block method, and this is really one that you can play around with in lots of different ways. So here I've got two different parts of the design, but you could chop and change what you make here. So I've got a pheasant and I've also got a meadow scene as well, which are already carved out. I could add other elements to this, so I could add in a butterfly, I could add in other plants, other animals. So the freestyle method really is a way of exploring, just freely with different elements of an image that you can build up, and it's really up to you how you play around with that. If you're wanting it to be a bit more consistent in terms of producing an edition of prints, what you could do is take a bit of paper that you're printing onto, and you could draw around each of the blocks to make a basic registration. So you can just kind of figure out a layout. So mine's not going to be that complicated, but if you've got lots of different bits and you want to kind of decide where they're going to go each time, you can draw around one part, and you can label it if it helps as well. And you can then kind of offset the other elements as you like into the different corners. With this one, it's quite nice. I might just have the pheasant just sticking out of the side there slightly. So this is a nice way of kind of breaking up the shape of the image as well. A lot of prints end up being in kind of square blocks or rectangles, whereas this method you can kind of start to free up the shape of the overall image as well. So that's my registration. I'm just going to pop that to one side because I'll just leave that over there for a moment. And then the first thing, or the next thing, is to ink up the different blocks. So you can do this at different stages, so you might want to do a print run of one block at a time. So using your registration, I might do several of the meadow block, print those all up, and then once they're dry, start printing over the top with different ones. But just for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to print both blocks one on top of the other in succession. What I'd also suggest with this technique is to consider the use of transparency in your ink. I use the Caligo or the Cranfield inks, and these are oil based, so they dry permanently, but they're also safe wash, so they're really good for using at home, and you get a really good quality with them as well. And as with that brand, you also get an extender as well. So the extender helps to elongate the drying time, but it also spreads out the pigment of the ink more as well, so that you can see that this colour here has got a lot more transparency than this one below, which is much more opaque. So I'm just going to ink up my meadow block. You could also do this with a colour blend as well, so you could kind of play around with colours and really get playful with different layering. But I've chosen to do a transparent colour for this first layer so that the pheasant really sticks out over the top of it as well. It's got a little bit of browns picked up in my ink there, but I don't mind that because it might make it quite interesting. Okay. So I'll just grab my registration here. I'm going to just pop that down into place. And what I'm going to use to print with, rather than using a press, because a lot of people don't have presses at home, there are lots of different ways that you can print at home. You can use a wooden spoon or a metal spoon, or you can use the back of a tin, or you can use a clean roller. So I tend to use a clean roller. That's my one of choice. But yeah, it's kind of up to you. And just to register, just line up the corner, so pop your paper over the block, and then it just gives you a kind of rough registration really. Again, with freestyle, we're not worrying about it too much. Just make sure that you do catch each area of the design as well, so every corner of it. There we go. You can peel back and reveal your first layer. So that's worked nicely, and you can see also how transparent this colour is, which is nice as a first layer. So I'm just going to move the registration to one side again, and I'll just ink up my pheasant as well. So for this I've mixed a really opaque ink. So the Cranfield inks are really highly pigmented, so they're really nice and opaque. So if you're wanting really solid layers, yeah, you can just leave them as they are and mix them together from the tin. But as I say, the extender is a really nice option for giving you even more variance in your colours as well. So I'm just going to ink up my pheasant. Again, I could be a little bit more creative with inking up the pheasant in kind of pheasant colours really. So you could create colour blends and really build up your prints in lots of different ways. So just bringing back my registration sheet. So I'm going to put that back there. So I've made this outline for where the pheasant's going to go. So make sure you've got your print the right way up again. And I'm just going to line up the corner again. Place it down. And you might find, depending on your design, that it does work better to let your prints dry in between printing the different elements. Let's have a look. There we go. So we've got the pheasant printed over the meadow. There is some kind of layering of design underneath there. So you could work around that by creating a kind of stencil to block anything coming through. But if you like it kind of building up and showing kind of through the different layers, then that's something to just kind of carry on playing with as well. So that's the freestyle method. The second method of multiple block that I'm going to show you is what I call the jigsaw technique. This method can be used to help layer when you're doing other methods as well. So the third method I'm going to show you is the key block technique, and you can use this, you can combine the two of these together, which will make sense when you see the key block one as well. But the basic principle of the jigsaw method is exactly that you cut the block into separate pieces in order for them to become separate pieces that can then be printed together. So what you can do is separate them, ink them up in different colours, and then put them back together again to print essentially as a single block again. A top tip with that, for this method I do find using the softer lino easier because it cuts through a bit more kind of easily with the knife. And also another tip is to sometimes take off a bit of the back edge when you're cutting the block, so that when you put it back together it goes back with ease as well. So you might want to play around with this in different ways, and the main thing I would maybe consider to start with is to keep your design really simple, so that you don't overcomplicate it, because it can get really fiddly once you start inking up the different bits. In terms of registration, again, this treating it as a single block, it doesn't matter too much. However, I think it's good to kind of get in the practice of using registration. So again, for this method, all I've got here is a piece of paper. I've drawn round the blocks together, so you can see that when they come together they're going to end up centred in the middle of the page, and that's just a really simple way of registering. So put those to one side. What I've prepared here is I've done a colour blend, so using an ink that I already had prepared, I've just added a bit of yellow to the side to make a basic colour blend. To get a really clear colour blend, the best thing to do is to have two blobs of ink about 1 inch apart, drag them down and gradually rock from side to side, overlapping by about 1 centimetre, and you'll get a much more graded colour blend. Whereas my one is just a little bit of a hint of a colour blend really, with a bit of yellow one side blending into the red. So I'm going to use my colour blend to ink up the sun block. So I'm going to do it this way round. Just play around a little bit. So I have the lightest area in the middle. Okay, so that's the one block ready. And then the second block for the moon, I've just prepared a kind of midnighty greeny blue colour here. So this is really satisfying as a technique, but obviously you might need a little bit more inking up space. You also need more than one roller. So there's a couple of things to consider there in terms of setting up, because you are printing the colours at the same time. Okay, so if I bring my registration back, I'm just going to position the blocks back into place. Just take care to obviously grab the block by the edges. As you go, you might get a bit messy, so it's good to have an apron on to wipe your fingers on, or a damp cloth or something, just to kind of keep your fingers neat in between. So we just slotted the two blocks together there, and then we're ready to print. So let's grab my paper. I'm going to line it up in the corner. So same as the first registration method I showed you. The thing that could happen as you're printing in this way is maybe the blocks might shift slightly because you've got multiple blocks under there. You just need to try and make sure that they do stay in place. So just take your time with your hand to hold them in place. Obviously if you've got a press, that will not be a problem. Okay, then you peel back, and then you've got the two colours in one go. So that's worked really effectively. The third method I'm going to show you is the key block method, and this is the more complicated of the three. With this method, usually you start off by designing an image that is just black and white, that works on its own, and that has kind of options of areas that you could work with to build up. So I'm using my cottage design, which I designed to be just a single block, but I'm now going to try and create a second block that can be coloured in the background to create some shading and some colour for the design and to turn it into a multiple block. So the main thing with this method is that you need to prepare a registration frame that is going to be a little bit more robust and that will help you to get more consistent prints as an addition. The first thing I've done is I've got a piece of mount card here, and the first thing I did was I drew around a piece of paper onto it. So I'm working with A5 paper. I've just drawn a line to make sure I've got that edge for the paper there. The next thing I did was I took my block and I drew around it in the centre. Generally in printmaking you leave a border around the print for mounting and framing, so just made sure that that's nice and centred on there. The next thing I've done is I've cut that centre piece out, so a bit of a Blue Peter moment there, and I've cut this out so that my block can fit nice and snugly into that gap. A top tip with that is to make sure that you use a safety ruler, but also to cut ever so slightly inside the line that you've drawn when you draw around the block, and this helps to make sure that it's really snug. If you do cut it out and it's a little bit loose, another tip is to wrap a little bit of masking tape around the edge of the frame so that you can just kind of buffer and push the block in. The next stage is to also make sure that your second block fits into that hole and doesn't move either. So this block is the one that I'm going to use to make a second layer that has a kind of colour where the cottage is, so it's not just a white house. So I'll come back to that in a moment. The other thing I've done to try and make it a little bit more secure is I've taped some straight bits of card to create a corner here. You could glue, but I've just taped for speed really. And this is where the paper is going to slot into. So I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so the next thing is to transfer the design from my first block onto my second. If I did this straight away, what would happen is it will reverse the image and it's not going to line up at all. So this multiple block transfer method helps to ensure from the start that each block that you do, so it might be that I have more than one other block, but it helps to ensure that each of them all line up. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my house, and I want to just make sure that I've definitely got a good ink up of the block, that it's as good as it would be for a print really, and this will make sense in a moment. So I've got an opaque ink, so just ink up your block as normal. Make sure you've got all of it. That up and bring my registration back. So I'm going to pop the block into that gap that I've made, make sure that it's in place properly. And next I'm going to take a print onto a bit of paper. So using the corner of the paper where there's a real right angle, I'm going to really carefully make sure that that's lined up against the card. And just take an extra second there to make sure that that is in place. And then I'm going to take a print. Make sure as well that the paper doesn't move. So just take a bit of extra care here. It's better to start working small as well, I find. Obviously if you are working on a bigger design, you've got more scope for adding lots of different elements as well. Okay, so we've got our print onto the paper, and while the ink is wet, I'm going to take this block out, take the second block, make sure that that's nice and firmly in place again, and then we're going to print from the print onto the second block. And this will ensure that it's the right way round for carving. So take an extra second again to make sure it's all lined up. Might need a little extra pressure to transfer. And you can do this as many times onto different blocks as you need for different areas that you want to work with as well. So you can actually end up with several different designs. So there you are. So you've got print on the paper, which is now transferred onto the second block. And so you can see that both blocks are the right way round. So what I'll do with this block next is I'll be preparing the area and probably just cutting out around the house shape. So anything that I don't want to be, say, the red brick colour of the house, I'll be cutting away. So I don't need to worry about too much detail here. It's just on there as a reference. So the main thing will be to kind of possibly cut out the door area, cut out the sides and the top here, and then that's ready as a second block to print with. Okay, so the next stage, I have now carved out that second block. So where I'd printed onto it, I've now carved out the area that I want to print as the first layer. So you now end up kind of going backwards in the design. So this is the top layer now. The key block is what prints over the top of everything to pull the image together, and then any other subsequent blocks are the ones that are kind of the layers of colour that kind of build up different areas of the image as well. So we're now ready to kind of start a print run. So do a series of these printed first of all, and then once those are dry, I would normally then print the key block over those afterwards. But for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to print one of these and then show you how the key block lines up over the top. So again, I'll just put my registration frame to one side again. Here I've just mixed a kind of slightly terracotta-y red, and I've also mixed in a little bit of extender into that again as well, so that the colour is slightly more transparent and so that the opaque black prints really nice and neatly over the top. So first of all, I'm just going to grab some of this ink and ink up this one here. I could have put a bit more detail into this. I was thinking about carving some bricks into it, but because the key block has all the detail, you don't necessarily need to fuss too much. It can get a bit too fussy, a bit too messy if you overcomplicate things in multiple block. So keeping it nice and simple is sometimes the best way. So you can see now I've got my layer of red. I'm going to bring back my registration, pop that into place. There's an area where I've carved where it's taken away a bit of a corner. Doesn't matter massively, just make sure that the rest of the block just sits in the right place there and it's set down into that cutout square. And then we're back to lining up the corner, taking that extra second, taking this first layer. It's really satisfying when this does line up well, but it might take a couple of prints. You might still get a couple of prints in your print run that are slightly off, where you've had a little lapse of concentration. But generally, the registration should help you to ensure that it does line up each time. So I'll just peel that back. So here's the first layer for my house. It's a little bit dark, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. So the next thing, I'm going to remove this first block, pop the registration to one side as well. I'm going to ink up this second block again. Okay, so we're ready for the registration again, and place this block down. So as I say, I'll do a run of the first colour first of all, normally, and let them dry, but I just want to kind of test that it's lining up all right. So I'm just going to take that, pop it down again, extra second. And remember, this time you've got that added detail of the key block that's printing over the top as well. Here we go. So there we have it. So the colour's a little bit too strong, I would say, so I probably mixed in a little bit more transparency and perhaps a little bit more yellow to make it a bit more of a brick colour. But that is the main principle of the key block method. Now I could always kind of create different blocks to do the sky or the rooftops and work on different areas of it. But just to show you the main principle of that process, there we've got a 2-block, multiple block with the key design. So here are the final 3 designs. I hope that you found this course really useful and that it's given you lots of ideas for your own work. Thank you for watching and good luck with your own printing projects.